Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. It's just one verse, got two sentences here, but there's a lot of information. There's a good message in here for us. So let me read it first, and then I will ask some questions to help us understand it. Verse 7. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. Well, the first question, which may be obvious, is who's Noah? Well, in case you don't know, let me give you a little recap. This is based on his story back in the book of Genesis, starting in Genesis chapter 5, verse 28, and going to Genesis chapter 9, verse 28. A little over 4 verses. You might want to read that when you get a chance. Here's some highlights. Noah is the 10th generation from Adam. Noah's name means relief. Noah fathered 3 sons when he was 500 years old. And Noah lived during an age of near universal evil. But Noah found favor in God's eyes. Noah was a righteous man. There was no evil found in Noah, unlike his generation, which was completely evil. And Noah walked with God. Noah walked with God. That sounds familiar. There's somebody else who walked with God. It was Noah's great-grandfather, Enoch. Now, another question. What unseen events did God warn Noah about? Well, based on Genesis chapter 2, verse 5 through 6, we can suppose that rain had not yet occurred and therefore was an unseen event. And if rain had never been seen, then neither had flooding. You know, there's a well-known saying, we probably use it ourselves, seeing is believing. But faith says that believing is seeing. And Noah had faith. He believed what God said, his message to him, and he acted on it and built that ark. This raises another question. How long was Noah building the ark? There's a pretty good range here of suppositions. 120 years is the longest I've ever heard, and that's based on using Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, the record of God's words, and that Noah was the likely person who recorded this or passed it down verbally. And the shorter duration is 30 years, and that's based on the record in Genesis chapter 5 of the youngest ages that men fathered sons, and that those younger ages being somewhere around about 65, 70 years old. So that would make the period that Noah was building the ark only 30 years, assuming that that was the age that his sons took wives. That's kind of a convoluted thing. Anyway, 30 years, 120 years, there's a big range there. Can you imagine building a project that long for something unseen, which was humanly unimaginable, had never occurred before? Can you imagine what your neighbors were saying? Probably pretty much anybody, friends, enemies, maybe even some of your relatives. So he endured a lot of scoffing. So we know something about that. We've seen it ourselves. But here's what Jesus said about this in Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 through 12. This is probably familiar to many of you. Let me read it again. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, that's so much for the first sentence of the verse we have today, and that is that Noah had faith and he acted on it. Now, what about the second sentence? It says, by this he condemned the world. Well, that raises the question, how did he do that? His belief and his actions were what judged the world's vain confidence that it would never flood, it would never rain, and that they believed that they were right and Noah was wrong. That got judged on that. And also their hatred of God as well as their hatred of Noah. They were judged on that as well. So to sum it all up, our verse is faith is not just idle sitting around waiting for God to act. It requires believing God and acting on the words of his message. Now, I truly believe that God has a message for each person here on earth. Now, how do we know if we've received a message from God? That is our final question for today. Well, here's some thoughts you might consider. This message may come from your conscience. It may come as a direct word to your soul. It may come from the advice or rebuke of some godly person. It may leap out at you while you're reading the Bible, and it may come as a challenge from a sermon you've heard or seen. Whenever and wherever it comes from, you and I have a choice to live our lives from that point onward as this is the most important message in the entire world, or to disregard this message. But know this, if we neglect it at our own peril. Thanks for watching today.